The afternoon light slanted across a quiet stretch of California's inland hills, where the army had raised a temporary compound for the newest group of surrendered Japanese soldiers. Beyond the wire fence, the fields shimmered gold with harvest grain, and the sound of locusts filled the dry air. The war was technically over, but nobody in that camp quite knew what peace was supposed to feel like. A convoy of trucks rolled to a stop beside the gate. Dust rose and hung in the heat. Inside the open-back trucks, 30 Japanese captives sat in silence. Some still wore their faded khaki uniforms, others simple undershirts stained by weeks of travel. Their faces were thin, sunburned, unreadable. They had not spoken since sunrise. Each man had been told by rumor that capture meant humiliation, perhaps worse. From the guard post, Sergeant James Hollis watched the newcomers with the practiced stillness of a man who'd seen too much to be surprised anymore. He was 27, short-haired, deliberate in every movement. 2 campaigns in the Pacific had stripped him of illusions, but not of decency. When headquarters assigned him to oversee this group of prisoners, he accepted with quiet relief. Maybe, he thought, this job will finally feel human. Corporal Miller jogged up beside him. "They look half-starved, Sarge. You sure the kitchen's ready?" "Been ready since noon," Hollis said. "We'll feed them before we do anything else." Miller blinked. "Feed them? Sir, these fellas were shooting at us a month ago." Hollis exhaled smoke from his cigarette and nodded toward the trucks. "That's exactly why. The war's finished. We start acting like it." He flicked the cigarette into the dirt and walked to meet the column. The interpreter, a Nisei sergeant named Haruto Tanaka, followed at his side, carrying a clipboard and an uneasy half-smile. The gate clanked open. The Japanese soldiers hesitated. For them, the metallic groan of a gate had never meant freedom. But there was no shouting, no gun butts striking the air. Only the steady voice of Sergeant Hollis. "Step down slowly, line up by twos. You'll get water, then food." Tanaka repeated the command in Japanese. His accent carried the rhythm of both worlds, enough authority to be understood, enough warmth to sound believable. Still, the men looked suspicious. One by one, they climbed down. Their boots crunched on gravel. The smell hit them first, something rich, unfamiliar, almost sweet. It drifted from the mess area behind the tents, the unmistakable scent of meat cooking over open flame. Private Kenji Takahashi caught it and froze. For weeks he had lived on handfuls of rice and watery soup. His stomach twisted so hard he almost felt ashamed. It can't be for us, he thought. They wouldn't waste meat on prisoners. A shout broke his thought. "Water here!" A US medic handed out tin cups, filling them from a canteen. The gesture was brisk, mechanical, but not cruel. Kenji drank. The water tasted like metal and mercy. Hollis motioned toward the dining area, a long wooden table under a canvas awning. On it sat plates, real ones, stacked beside baskets of bread and boiled potatoes. 2 cooks turned thick slices of beef on portable stoves. Grease hissed, flames snapped, the smell deepened. The Japanese line stopped short, murmuring. Hollis looked at Tanaka. "Tell them it's supper," he said. Tanaka hesitated. "They won't believe me." "Then show them." Tanaka walked to the table, took a plate, and nodded for one of the cooks to serve him. A steak dropped onto the plate with a wet sizzle. He lifted a fork, took a small bite, and smiled. A simple act that said safe. Slowly, uncertainly, the captives followed. They moved as if walking into a trap. No guards raised rifles, no one shouted. The Americans mirates. Eli stepped aside to make room. When Kenji reached the front, an older cook, a man with silver hair and arms the size of barrels, handed him a plate. "Hot off the grill?" he said, voice gravelly but kind. Kenji bowed instinctively. The cook, not understanding, tipped his hat back and grinned. Kenji carried the plate to the bench, sat and stared. The steak shimmered in its own juices, dark edges crisp, a small pat of butter melting on top. He could feel the heat on his palms. Around him, others whispered prayers they hadn't said in years. He waited for permission, but no one came to stop him. He cut a small piece and lifted it to his mouth. The flavor hit like a memory of home, of his mother frying fish in a tiny Osaka kitchen, of festivals where the air smelled of soy and smoke. The meat was foreign, but the warmth was universal. A lump rose in his throat. He forced it down with another bite. Across the table, Corporal Miller leaned to Hollis. "You think they even appreciate it?" "They don't have to," Hollis said. "It's not about that." "What's it about then? Ending the war in their heads?" Miller frowned, but he didn't argue. He watched as one of the prisoners, a man with a captain's insignia still sewn to his sleeve, stood and bowed deeply to the American cooks. The gesture rippled through the line. Others followed. The kitchen went quiet. For a brief second, language didn't matter. When the meal ended, Hollis ordered the men to rest. They were led to a row of canvas tents set up beyond the main path. Each had blankets folded at the entrance. The prisoners accepted them hesitantly, as if the fabric might vanish if touched too eagerly. Kenji spread his blanket on the wooden floor. It smelled faintly of soap. He hadn't touched anything clean in months. He lay down but couldn't sleep. His mind replayed the clatter of forks, the quiet nods between soldiers and captives, the look in Hollis's eyes, not pity, not pride, just recognition. He thought of the stories their officers used to tell, that surrender meant disgrace, that Americans treated prisoners like vermin. Yet here he was, full for the first time in weeks, wrapped in warmth that belonged to his enemy. Outside, a harmonica began to play, slow, melancholy, drifting through the night. One of the guards, maybe. The tune carried across the tents, gentle as a lullaby. Kenji listened until exhaustion blurred thought and memory together. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered in Japanese, "Maybe they are human after all." In the guard post, Hollis stubbed out his final cigarette. The stars were sharp above the Black Hills. He thought of his brother, lost in the Philippines, and wondered what mercy might have meant to him if the situation had been reversed. He didn't know if kindness could heal anything, but he knew cruelty never had. He watched the camp lights dim one by one until only the glow of the kitchen remained. The cooks were scrubbing pans, laughing softly about home, about baseball, about nothing important. Normal things. Hollis smiled. Normal felt like victory. A breeze moved through the compound, carrying the faint scent of grilled meat that still lingered in the air. A scent that for one strange evening had replaced the smell of war. If stories like this remind you that even in the darkest times humanity endures, remember to subscribe. We share a true story of compassion every day, because history isn't just about battles, it's about the people who chose mercy.
Morning broke soft and pale over the camp. A low fog drifted through the valley, curling around the fences like smoke from an extinguished fire. For the first time in months, the sound of distant artillery was gone. Only birds and boots on gravel marked the start of the new day. Private Kenji Takahashi woke to the muted rustle of movement inside the tent. The other men were stirring, stretching beneath their blankets, unsure whether to rise or wait for orders. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and brewed coffee, an American luxury that felt almost surreal. He sat up slowly. His body ached in familiar ways, but his mind felt lighter. The dinner from last night lingered in his memory like a dream that refused to fade. He still couldn't believe what he had seen, that soldiers from the same nation who had bombed his home could hand him food without hatred in their eyes. Outside, the camp buzzed with quiet efficiency. American soldiers moved between tents, carrying trays, canteens, and papers. Nobody shouted. Nobody threatened. The discipline here was gentle, almost casual. At the far end of the path, Sergeant Hollis stood beside a supply truck, sleeves rolled up, talking with Tanaka. The morning light caught the silver dog tags around his neck. When he noticed the prisoners emerging, he gave a short wave, not a command, just acknowledgement. Tanaka turned to the group and spoke in Japanese, his voice clear but soft. Breakfast will be served soon. Afterwards, there will be work details. Simple tasks, cleaning, organizing, gardening. Nothing forced. A few of the older captives exchanged looks. One of them muttered under his breath that this must be some kind of test. Kenji didn't know what to think. His stomach, however, made the decision for him. They lined up quietly at the mess tent. The Americans had laid out oatmeal, bread, and slices of fruit, a humble meal. But to men who had lived on scarcity, it looked like a feast. Kenji sat near the edge of the bench. Across from him, one of the American privates, a broad-shouldered boy barely older than himself, pushed over a tin cup filled with coffee. Here, the soldier said. Try it. Might taste strange. Kenji hesitated, then nodded politely. The bitterness surprised him. It wasn't pleasant, but it was warm, alive, and real. The private chuckled. First cup's always the hardest. Kenji smiled faintly. Thank you, he said in broken English. The private pointed at himself. Walter. Then at Kenji. You? Kenji. They nodded, an awkward bridge forming through gestures more than words. Hollis watched from a distance. He noticed the way the prisoners carried themselves now, not proudly, but no longer like ghosts either. The difference between fear and dignity, he thought, was thinner than a thread, and twice as fragile. After breakfast, the men were divided into small groups for chores. Hollis assigned Kenji's unit to tend the vegetable patch behind the camp, a stretch of soil left by a previous regiment. Tanaka translated the instructions while Miller handed out tools. Keep it simple, Hollis said. Let them work, not toil. Kenji took a hoe and knelt beside the rows of wilted plants. The sun had burned through the fog, and sweat soon gathered at his neck. Across the field, he saw Hollis helping repair a fence post, his hands rough and steady. It was strange, Kenji thought, to see an enemy doing honest work. Back home, the war had painted Americans as cruel conquerors. But this man looked more like a farmer than a monster. At noon, Hollis walked over carrying a jug of water. You boys earned this, he said. Tanaka repeated the words. The prisoners lined up silently as Hollis filled their canteens. When it was Kenji's turn, their eyes met again, the same recognition as BF. But deeper now. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Tanaka broke the moment. Sergeant Hollis says you're doing good work. Kenji bowed slightly. We are grateful.
Tell him we are not doing this for gratitude, Hollis said with a half-smile. We do it because it's right. Tanaka hesitated, then translated with care. Kenji nodded. He understood more than the words. After the break, a few American soldiers joined them in the field. At first, the two sides worked in silence, divided by language and memory. Then someone, the cook with the silver hair from last night, began to whistle. The tune was cheerful, off-key, and somehow contagious. One by one the others joined in, humming awkwardly, until even a few of the Japanese men began to smile. When the sun dipped westward, the day's labor ended. The prisoners stacked their tools neatly and waited for orders. Hollis dismissed them with a gesture. Go rest, he said. You've earned it. That evening the meal was simpler, bread, beans and stew, but the atmosphere had changed. The tables buzzed with quiet talk. Through Tanaka's translations, stories passed between enemies who no longer sounded like enemies. Walter asked Kenji about his home. Osaka, Kenji replied, forming the word carefully. City, near water. Sounds nice, Walter said. I'm from Iowa. Fields, not water. But I'd like to see Japan someday, when all this craziness ends. Kenji laughed softly, surprised by the idea. "And I," he said, "would like to see baseball." "Baseball?" Walter's face lit up. "You play?" Kenji mimed swinging a bat. "A little?" The two laughed. Around them others watched, curious, amused. Tanaka shook his head with a smile. "Maybe peace starts with a game," he said. Hollis overheard and chuckled. "Then we'd better find them a ball." Later that night, Hollis sat outside the administrative tent, writing in his notebook. The page glowed under the lantern's soft yellow light. His handwriting was careful, almost meditative. Day 2, no trouble. The men worked willingly, shared jokes, even laughed. It's strange. After all that death, this quiet feels unreal. I wonder if peace is just war without noise. He closed the notebook, looked up at the stars, and let the silence wash over him. Inside the sleeping quarters, Kenji couldn't rest. He sat near the tent flap, gazing out at the sky. The air was cool, the moon low. Somewhere beyond the fence, a radio played faint jazz from the American side, a sound unlike anything he had heard. He listened, entranced. His friend, Corporal Sato, stirred. "Can't sleep." Kenji shook his head. "The music, it feels like a dream." Sato frowned. "Don't forget who they are, Kenji. We are prisoners." Kenji looked down. "Maybe, but today they treated us like men. That is new." Sato didn't answer. He turned over, pulling his blanket tight. Kenji stayed awake, watching shadows drift across the dirt floor, feeling the strange ache of hope. The next morning brought a surprise. When the prisoners stepped outside, they saw a crude baseball diamond marked out in the open lot beside the mess hall. Hollis stood at home plate, holding a scuffed bat. Walter tossed a ball in his hands, grinning like a schoolboy. Hollis raised his voice. "Tanaka, tell them we're going to play some ball." The interpreter hesitated, then shouted the translation. A ripple of confusion ran through the group. Kenji stepped forward, half smiling, half unsure. "Play baseball?" he asked in English. Hollis nodded. "Why not? You said you liked it, didn't you?" Kenji blinked, realizing Walter must have told him. "Yes, I like." Hollis tossed him the ball. Kenji caught it cleanly. A few of the Americans whistled. "He's got good hands," someone called out. Within minutes, the camp transformed. Guards became pitchers, cooks became fielders, and prisoners became teammates. The first swing sent the ball flying over the dusty field, and laughter erupted from both sides. The tension that had clung to the camp since the war's end seemed to evaporate in the summer air. Tanaka watched from the sideline, shaking his head in disbelief. "I translate battles, negotiations, surrender papers, but this," he smiled, "this I did not expect." Hollis hit a soft grounder and jogged to first base, laughing as a Japanese sergeant tagged him out. "He's out!" Walter yelled. "Man, they're good!" Evening settled over the camp before the game ended. The final score didn't matter. Everyone was grinning, exhausted, and dusty. As they lined up for supper, Hollis noticed something remarkable. The men no longer walked in separate groups. They mingled, talking with gestures and laughter, their shadows stretching together across the fading light. When darkness fell, the Americans built a small fire near the kitchen. Someone strummed a guitar. To everyone's surprise, one of the Japanese soldiers, an older man with delicate hands, began to hum along, matching the chords perfectly. The song turned into a soft duet of two languages, two melodies woven into one. Hollis sat back, listening. Miller nudged him. "Never thought I'd see this, Sarge." "Neither did I," Hollis said. "Guess we all underestimated peace." Kenji watched the flames dance, the faces lit in orange glow. American, Japanese, all the same. He thought of his mother's garden, of the plum blossoms that bloomed every spring, and wondered if she would believe this night if he could tell her. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth sink in. For the first time since the war began, he didn't feel like a soldier or a captive. He felt human. The guitar quieted. The fire cracked softly. And in that silence, under the wide California sky, two nations found a moment of shared breath, fragile, brief, but real. The next week passed in a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. Morning drills were replaced by chores, arguments by laughter, suspicion by small talk. The camp had become less a prison and more a temporary village stitched together by unfamiliar goodwill. Private Kenji Takahashi found himself looking forward to the mornings. He would rise before the others, step outside the tent, and watch the sunlight slide over the hills like a slow tide. Sometimes he saw Sergeant Hollis doing the same, coffee in hand, sleeves rolled, scanning the horizon as though still expecting distant thunder. When their eyes met, they exchanged a nod that said more than words ever could. Peace had a strange way of sneaking up on people. That afternoon, the Americans arranged another game, baseball again, though this time the teams were mixed. Hollis pitched for the captives, Walter caught for the Americans, and laughter echoed louder than any shout of war ever had. By the end, nobody kept score. The only thing that mattered was the sound of gloves snapping and the sight of dust swirling beneath an open sky. Afterward, Kenji sat on the edge of the field, breathing hard. Hollis walked over and dropped beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply listened to the cicadas buzzing in the warm air. "You've got a good arm," Hollis said. Kenji smiled, understanding only part of the sentence but recognizing the compliment in the tone. "Thank you, Sergeant." Hollis nodded. "War's over. Call me James." Kenji hesitated, then repeated softly, "James." The name felt strange on his tongue, like a word borrowed from another life. Hollis pulled something from his pocket, a folded photograph. He handed it over. Kenji studied the image. Two small boys standing beside a woman on a porch, a dog at their feet. "Your family?" he asked. "Yeah," Hollis said. "My boys and my wife, Anna. Haven't seen them in 3 years. Kenji traced the edges of the photo with his finger, careful not to smudge it. He reached into his own jacket and drew out a wrinkled picture of his parents standing in front of their shop in Osaka. He offered it to Hollis. "Family," Kenji said simply. Hollis took the photo, nodded once, and gave a faint smile. "Looks like good people." Kenji tucked it back against his heart. "I hope they safe." Hollis looked away toward the western hills glowing orange in the late sun. "After everything, I hope everybody's safe," he said quietly. The moment lingered. Two soldiers on opposite sides of a war sitting together in the calm after the storm, trading memories instead of bullets. That evening, a messenger jeep arrived from headquarters with new orders. The camp would be closing in a few days. The captives would be transferred to a larger processing center before eventual repatriation. Hollis read the document twice, then folded it into his pocket. He felt relief, yes, but also an odd sadness. The routine they had built here, fragile as it was, had meant something. After supper, he called Tanaka aside. "Tomorrow I want them to write letters," he said, "to their families. We'll mail them through the Red Cross." Tanaka blinked. "That's not standard procedure." "Maybe not," Hollis replied, "but it's the right thing." The next day, paper and pencils were laid out on the mess tables. The Japanese men approached uncertainly, as if expecting the offer to vanish. Tanaka explained the instructions, translating patiently.
Kenji sat for a long time before writing. He hadn't held a pencil since his capture. The first line came slowly, "Mother, Father, the war has ended. I am alive." The words looked fragile, almost ashamed of themselves. He continued, describing the camp, the food, the kindness he still didn't fully understand. He wrote about baseball, about the man named James, about the strange peace that hung in the air. At the end he paused, unsure how to close. Finally he added, perhaps mercy is also victory. He folded the page carefully, sealing it with trembling hands. When Hollis collected the letters, he saw Kenji's eyes glisten. Good news? He asked. Kenji nodded. Yes. Good. Hollis placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll make sure it gets there. That night, the camp held a farewell meal. The cooks went all out, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, even a small ration of sugar for coffee. Someone rigged a phonograph, and scratchy swing music floated across the compound. For the first few minutes, the atmosphere felt formal, uncertain. Then Walter clapped his hands and started a rhythm on the table. Laughter broke out, a few of the captives joined in, clapping along. The stiffness melted. Tanaka raised his glass. To whom? He said in both languages. For everyone. Hollis stood. To peace, he added. The men echoed the word, peace, some in English, some in Japanese. For the first time, it didn't sound foreign. Later, as the camp lights dimmed, Kenji walked toward the gate. A guard stepped aside, allowing him to stand by the fence. Beyond it, the field stretched dark and endless. Crickets sang, and the wind smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. He thought about the steak dinner, the baseball games, the letters soon to travel across the ocean. He thought about the way Hollis had looked at him, not as an enemy, but as a man. And he realized something that startled him. With its simplicity, mercy, when given freely, carries a power greater than any victory. Behind him, footsteps approached. It was Hollis. Couldn't sleep either? He asked. Kenji shook his head. Too quiet. Yeah, Hollis said, smiling. Takes getting used to. They stood together in silence, watching the moon drift between clouds. Finally, Hollis spoke. You'll go home soon. When you do, remember this. War doesn't decide who's right. It just decides who's left. What we do after, that's what matters. Kenji listened carefully, catching only pieces of the meaning, but enough to understand the heart of it. He bowed slightly. Thank you. James. Hollis extended his hand. Kenji hesitated, then took it. Their palms met, rough, calloused, human. For a moment the war truly ended. 3 days later, the trucks came. The prisoners loaded their few belongings. The Americans lined the road, not as guards but as escorts. When Kenji climbed aboard, he turned and raised a hand in farewell. Walter saluted. Hollis simply nodded, his expression steady. As the trucks rolled away, dust swallowed the road, and the camp fell silent except for the rustle of flags in the wind. Hollis stayed there long after the convoy disappeared. He felt no triumph, no sorrow, just a quiet certainty that something good had happened, something small but enduring. He reached into his pocket and unfolded Kenji's photograph of his parents. For reasons he couldn't explain, he kept it. It reminded him that mercy leaves traces stronger than hate. Months later, across the ocean, in a rebuilt corner of Osaka, a letter arrived. Kenji's mother opened it with shaking hands. Her son's words were short, humble, filled with gratitude. She read them aloud to her husband, her voice trembling on the line that said, "They served us steak, father. And they did not hate us." Tears slipped down her cheeks. Or the first time since the bombs fell, she allowed herself to believe the world might heal.
Years after the war, Hollis visited a small museum dedicated to reconciliation. Among the exhibits was a display of letters written by former POWs. Behind glass, one sheet of paper caught his eye. Faded, written in neat Japanese script with an English translation beside it. Perhaps mercy is also victory. He stood there for a long time, reading the line again and again, until the words blurred. A young guide approached. Beautiful, isn't it? Yes, Hollis said softly. He meant every word. Outside, the sky was the same shade of gold as the day he first met the captives. Children played in the street, chasing a ball that bounced across the sidewalk. Hollis smiled, stepped aside to let it roll past, and whispered under his breath, "Play ball, Kenji." The laughter of children followed him down the street, proof that peace, once learned, never truly fades.